Hey, welcome back. It's Louisa from Feel Good Astrology. And this is part 2 of the question that I started to answer yesterday in my Lessons from Venus series, which I'm going to be recording something every single day for the 40 days and 40 nights of Venus retrograde, all about love and connection and how it shows up in astrology and how we can use astrology to help us connect with people better. And all different aspects. And, you know, if there's an aspect you'd like me to look at in particular, then please just drop me a line and I'll explore it in one of these 10-minute sessions. So one of the questions that I had was, am I cut out for relationships? So the person had a bit of, like, somebody had been moaning at her and saying, oh, when are you going to settle down with a nice man, etc., etc. Now, yesterday, I showed you a few different charts of people that were famous and not so famous, but people that I know as confirmed bachelors. And the first thing that I was really saying was, there's no such thing as an undateable chart because there'll be hundreds of people, thousands of people born at the exact same time as you, maybe not in the same place, but people with a really, really similar chart and very similar themes to you that are completely dateable. And completely cut out for relationships, and some people that choose not to have relationships. I think it goes much deeper than just astrology. I think a lot of it is also from the well, what I did was I showed some of these charts and showed some of the things that I notice in the charts of people who prefer to stay single. Now, some of them are preferring to stay single because of trauma. So they've had unresolvable issues and at some level have decided that it's actually easier for them to manage life as a single person than to put themselves out into the world in a place that makes them feel very vulnerable. And so it's a conscious choice. It's like a management choice. It's a preference. Life is smoother when they're on their own. Completely respect that and understand that too. And then there's also a group of people that actually are wanting to not be in a relationship from a place of freedom. So there's also a group of people who are really wanting that sense of freedom and find that being in a relationship maybe curtails that sense of freedom. Now, I would put in a caveat that even with those two preferred styles, and there's probably a load more other preferred styles that people have, the person who decides from a place of trauma that they don't want to have a relationship because of unresolvable issues. I've known many who've been single for decades who then suddenly meet somebody and all of a sudden they feel ready to deal with that trauma. So it's almost like the relationship comes at the time of a massive breakthrough. And similarly, I've known people, in fact, I know one that's happening with right now. Similarly, people who have lived their lives very freely because they believe in freedom and independence, and they've not met anyone that they could share that vibe with. At some level, there's always that chance that that may happen. So I really, you know, first of all, to answer my the question of one of my community members, am I cut out for relationships? The answer is yes, for sure, because everybody is. The potential is there in every single chart. I absolutely believe that. I also have never seen a chart where I've thought you're never going to be in a relationship ever. So they're the two things that I see as being the main reasons. But what is more interesting to me is when I'm looking at somebody's chart is trying to work out what their preferred love style is. I mentioned at some length yesterday that you know, for instance, saying that because you're a fire sign that you're suited to all fire signs because you're a similar type is really actually not that accurate. You may well have the love style of somebody who wants a quiet relationship. You might be super busy that you actually want your relationship to be a nurturing space. You might be somebody who's very quiet on the outside that wants something very exciting and raunchy on the inside. So we all have our different motivations. And I think this is where looking at a birth chart rather than a horoscope is very, very helpful. That said, let's bring up the chart of this person that I was speaking about, the person who has this question, because they actually carried some of the patterns that I was sharing about yesterday. So, for instance, one of the patterns that I was sharing about was hard aspects to Chiron. and to the outer planets. So in particular, where there's a hard aspect to Chiron with Saturn, that can put people into a place of not really wanting to, finding it easier to manage healing when you're on your own, because it's less onerous. And in particular, if I just use my mouse quickly, where is this running from? I can't remember where I'm. Aha, here's the chart. So I've got my mouse working. So in this person's chart, Chiron is very, very close to Saturn. And these are two planets that I think where there's a hard aspect, like a tight conjunction, an opposition, or a square, they do tend to create a feeling of unresolvable issues, unresolvable traumas. That's not to say they won't ever be resolved, but there is it's almost like a core loneliness. And that core loneliness might actually be triggered by other people in your life rather than actually when you're on your own, when you can actually be quite confident. So it's almost like the loneliness comes up as a trauma, when you're around the people. So this is quite, I see this a lot in the charts of people who, maybe prefer to stay single. Funnily enough, the person who asked this question, I also have a client born on the very same day who also prefers to stay single. I also have another client who is born in the same week, and their moon sign is different, but pretty much a lot of the other things are very, very similar, who is a complete who is completely monogamous and goes from one partner to another, like long term, but is never single. So, again, it really just depends on the actual love style itself. Now, this hard aspect from Chiron and Saturn to Pluto and Uranus, which is absolutely really seen in the charts of people born in around 1965, 1966. This one's born in 1966. It's really tight and it's quite problematic. But obviously not everyone who is age 56, 57, 58 is single. Loads of them have got married several times. Many of them have families from from a couple of different eras, in fact. So, this is a very strong time to be born. And in fact, I mentioned in another recording that, for somebody who also has the sun or the moon in a square to hard oppositions between outer planets and including Saturn and possibly Jupiter. Jupiter's here, thankfully. Jupiter's relaxing some of these energies. But, this person has got a very strong, hard square, from the sun to Pluto and Chiron and Saturn, and also the Venus, the planet of love, is also in a hard aspect to Saturn and Chiron and also Pluto. It's in a very deep T-square, and involves the sun. So, this is really part of the personality. So that is definitely something I see. Other things that I see is the moon in a difficult position with Uranus. That's not the case with this one. Sometimes the moon and Uranus together create a startling need for freedom and independence. So that's not so much the trauma. And also having these outer planets across the angles can also trigger a little bit of difficulty in terms of finding relationships at work. One of the reasons I put this down to, with these oppositions, especially with these outer planets, is the energy levels. When you've got such a perfection, with all of these very strong patterns. I mean, look at the patterns here, this really strong red, these T-squares, and then these beautiful trines and sextiles. The sacred geometry in this person's chart is really, really, really strong. But what I would say is, on a monthly basis, the moon will go around and touch every point in this chart. And so, for instance, when the moon goes over the sun in this person's chart, it's going to trigger not only the solar energy in this person's chart, but also Pluto and Uranus in a square to the moon, and then also the moon in a square to Chiron and Saturn. And so, all of the potential of possible loneliness, possibly finding it easy to be on your own because then you don't feel manipulated by this strong Pluto over here. Also, you don't feel like running. It's like every time there is this big emotion and the moon goes over this, it triggers a whole series of emotions. And then you can guarantee that 1 week later, when the moon goes over this part, right over the Chiron and Saturn, which is the time that I would say when the moon is in Pisces, I would say that's a very difficult time for this person. So if I was in your shoes, I would absolutely mark down when the moon goes into Pisces, because it will trigger those feelings of hurt through loneliness. Now, you might not know it as hurt through loneliness. Now, you might not, you might have got so used to just having these down moments where your energy is really low and when you just want to go inward. And if anyone's trying to pull you out of it, you'll meet them with a bit of suspicion, because when the moon is there, it's in opposition to this Pluto and Uranus. And so you're defensive when someone's trying to cheer you up. And then the moon goes down. Then when it hits Gemini, it's in opposition to the sun and square to these guys, and so on and so forth. So you can see that, the moon on the travels hits a lot of things in a month, 1 week, in fact, with this great big T-square. And it's not just people born 65 and 66, but I would say that T-squares or even grand squares, especially ones that involve outer planets and outer planet oppositions, on a month-by-month basis, the moon is going to activate your grand square every single week. And so, you may well find that when you're in relationships, especially if the person you're matching with also have planets in the same places, that your relationship could go up and down, up and down, up and down. And so the moment you get some relief from it, before you know it, you're being activated again. And so it becomes like, how do you manage your relationship? And so I think that's why, one of the reasons why so many people, especially women who really seek peace, and who often find that their energy systems get so mucked up with trauma and upset and anger and jealousy and possessiveness, that, I think that's the reason why so many say, you know what, I'm done. It's actually much easier to manage myself on a more even keel when I'm not in reaction to what's going on in my life in terms of other people. You add 2 people and you're managing the energy systems of 2 people. Now, obviously, whoever you're with, you should manage your own energy system, but that doesn't really happen in modern day relationships. We're always, when one partner's up, the other is usually up, and vice versa. When one's down, it usually brings the other partner down. So I think that's why so many people with these great big grand squares often find that they don't want to be in a relationship with somebody. However, you never know when you're going to meet somebody who's got a lot of patience and beautiful things just here that actually help to ease off some of these feelings and really support you here. Or you might meet somebody who's got a lot of stuff around Jupiter that again works quite empathically with these quite difficult areas. You may even meet somebody who's got the same patterns as you, and so you learn to manage your energy systems together. However, it's quite a tall order, and it can take many years to get into a pattern that works really well for you. Okay, so another thing that I would say in terms of relationships, and why someone might suddenly change their idea of not having a relationship, and I would say it's when one of these aspects happen. So these transiting planets. Sometimes, when one of these outer planets in particular comes over a very sensitive part of our chart, we go through a big life change. And when that happens, we often make new decisions. So I have seen it that Chiron sometimes represents a master or a teacher or a healer that comes into your life, or it could be a healing partner. So for instance, I've seen where people have, in fact, I've attracted very much healing relationships in my life. So when Chiron goes over one of my sensitive points in my chart, I often think, oh, I wonder who I'm about to meet. I wonder which magical person is going to come into my life and teach me something really revolutionary. Similarly, I had Pluto going over my Venus, actually when I met my husband. And, at the time when I could see Pluto coming up to my Venus after it had been over my Mars, my Neptune, my nodes, my Sun, and my Mercury in quick succession. When I saw it nearing my Venus, I was thinking, oh, great, just kill me now, whatever. I was just thinking, I can't bear to see how this ends. And actually what happened was, I met the love of my life, and literally within 1 year we were engaged to be married and had a child together. It all happened so quickly. And Pluto changes your life. And it can be an absolute, humdinger of a year. It could really change it in a bad way. And a lot of Pluto things we have to submit, we have to yield. So, Pluto going over a sensitive part of your chart could be the thing that turns everything around, as it did in my own chart. Saturn going over one of these angles can show where life, you start to get a bit tired of your own stuff, your own issues, and you start to get really tired of it. And you think, okay, I'm ready for an adventure now. So these planets going over big parts of our chart are alerting us to a readiness. But with all of, everything with astrology, I would say don't ever just rely on one aspect, because, we have that, like the sun moves over all of these things in the space of a year. The moon goes over it once a month, and we've got Mercury that goes through it once a year, Venus a little bit less than that, Mars every 2 and a bit years, and Jupiter goes through one sign a year. So, every year you're going to be having different planets touching different natal planets in your chart. You're always going to be having something going on. And the really important thing, I think, is to see the blend of what's going on. So right now, as the person in my community was being asked about, if she's ever going to date, right now she's got Mars going over the descendant, which is the point of relationships. We've also got Venus going retrograde, but after the 3rd of September, it will go over this point. Venus going over the descendant, or in fact any angle, or in fact over the sun, over Venus, over the moon, all of that can start the initial kind of sensuality, or the initial desire for connection. So, all of these different things are events, like the sun going over this person's Jupiter. So I would look for a lot of signs. But to answer the question, I would say there's no such thing as an undateable chart. Just maybe a reason why you don't want to connect, which is completely valid. And we all have the freedom to make a choice and also to change our mind. So, when someone says they are a confirmed bachelor or not, I just think, well, yeah, absolutely. And, when you change your mind, if you change your mind, that is also a possibility. So I hope that's helpful. No such thing as an undateable chart. I mean, there may be some astrologers that absolutely, don't believe that at all. But I like to use astrology in terms of everything being possible. So anyway, lots of love, and speak to you soon. Bye for now.